All right, today we have a very interesting show. One, because the person I'm talking to has been on this side as a journalist. Then he grew and moved to do international stuff, went out to be a diplomat. After a while, Kenyans felt, no, you need to come back and serve us as an MP. I'm sure you're all wondering who I'm speaking about. I'm talking about the Kamukunji MP, Yusuf Hassan. Karibu sana mheshimiwa.
Asante, asante. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, karibu sana. How does it feel being on the hot seat to share your story?
Well, I feel very comfortable. I feel someone who is not aggressive or ready to crush me with her questions and views. So I feel very comfortable. I feel very relaxed.
All right.
Like sitting in my own living room.
Ah, great. That's what we want here on the show. And we're happy to have you.
Yeah,
how is it going, especially with the COVID vaccinations?
Well, I mean, it started a bit slow. And I think we fortunately have been able to cover most of the health workers. And it's now got to more people. But unfortunately, as you know, we are facing a serious international problem in the sense there is vaccine nationalism. Powerful, rich countries of the north are hoarding the vaccines and are not able to share with developing countries like us. So I think unless we are able to address this inequality that exists between the north and the south and create a more equitable system of distribution, we are going to have another problem where countries like ours are going to be discriminated. Communities from poor developing countries of Africa and Asia are not going to have the vaccines that they need to protect their citizens. And I think it is absolutely necessary to create the opportunity where vaccines are available to all the people of the world without any discrimination, because we cannot fight this coronavirus as individual countries. It doesn't matter whether the entire population of Europe and America are vaccinated, as long as there are carriers in other parts of the world.
Then no one is safe.
Yes, absolutely. This vaccine is the solution.
All right. But at least we've seen donations have started coming in from Denmark, the US. So
yeah, but we don't need donations. We don't need that kind of kindness.
Yes.
What we need is an international system which is based on equity and fairness, which looks at the global market. We can buy the vaccines, but because rich countries have asked their manufacturers to sell it first to them, and they're hoarding those vaccines.
Yeah.
Many of these vaccines are now actually expiring, unfortunately, when there's a great need here. And countries like India, which were one of the few the global south producers, has been hit by a wave of coronavirus that they're not able to cope with their own needs, leave alone supplying us.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So the ultimate aim would be to get those vaccines manufactured locally.
Yes.
And there are now moves to make sure that we get the licensing authority, the permission from the manufacturers to allow a local manufacturer like in Kenya here to be able to manufacture that. That is the ultimate goal. South Africa is beginning to manufacture, but the volume isn't going to be sufficient to be able to cope with a large number of people. Yeah. Africa needs about 1 billion vaccines to be able to cover the whole population, maybe 2 billion because of the 2 doses.
Yeah.
So that's a huge volume, which we're not able to reach, at least within this year alone.
But we will get there. We believe we'll get
hopefully,
there.
Hopefully.
Yes. So before we go deep to the conversations of world politics and the politics of the country, let's just get to know who's Yusuf Hassan. Like, where did you grow up? Where were you born? Did you have siblings? How was your childhood like?
Well, my childhood was quite interesting. I was, my father and mother were quite nomadic in some ways. I was born here in Nairobi, and then I was sent for Quranic education to Garissa, and then from Garissa back to Nairobi, And then I grew up in Western Kenya, in places like Kuria.
Really?
Yes, in South Nyanza. And then I came back to Nairobi to start my first work here at the Voice of Kenya.
So how was it, where did you go to school at this point? Why was there migration from Western to Nairobi to Kisumu? What was the cause of your movement?
Well, my father was a trader. He was, not a very rich trader, but so he kept on looking for opportunities. Nairobi was a bit hard, and so he moved to Western Kenya, where he traded on the border. We were mostly border people.
Oh, okay.
When I went to Garissa, he was moved to Nyamtiro, which is in Kuria, near Migori, which was a border town. And then at the beginning, there was a conflict in northern Kenya, the so-called shifter war.
Yes.
I experienced the dark side of the state when we suffered quite a lot as a community. And then we fled to Tanzania. So I spent 4 or 5 years as a young star in Tanzania, in Tarime in Tanzania. After the settlement of that conflict, we came back to
This was in which year, if you remember?
From 1964-65
So
to
this is after independence.
1968, yes. In fact, this dark period that I witnessed was a period of displacement, period of extreme suffering in northern Kenya. And I think my politics were formed at that particular moment, because the village in Garissa that I grew up was virtually destroyed during that conflict. And many of the people who lived in that neighborhood were scattered as refugees into Somalia, into Tanzania, and into the rest of the country. And as a community, we've been scattered since then. We've never returned to the origins of that neighborhood until today. And people are found in the rest of Kenya, in East Africa, and in the world.
Yeah.
And I formed my view of the state during those formative years, because I could see that at that time, one of the first decisions made by the president of the country, Jomo Kenyatta, was to declare a state of emergency in northern Kenya. The same state of emergency that the colonial forces had declared against the Mau Mau. The same military forces and the police forces that crushed the Mau Mau were sent to northern Kenya to crush the rebellion that was emergent from there. And my family was involved in that conflict because my brother-in-law was the first person in independent Kenya to be detained, was the first political detainee in this country in November 1963. And so when I was growing up, I was growing up with a political mind that was often outraged by the level of repression, by the level of inequality and unfairness that exists in our society. The colonial created one, spilling over into independent Kenya.
All right.
Yeah.
So, and then you managed to clear your primary school still in Garissa? Or
I left Garissa when I was from class 2, and then I went to Western Kenya, and then I did my primary 4, 5, 6, and 7 in Tanzania.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I came back. A lot of people don't know that. And then I came back to do my secondary education at Taranganya Secondary School, which is in South Nyanza. I was expelled in Form 3.
Were you rebellious in high school?
I was involved in student politics.
So it started
Yes, yes. And I left. I came to Nairobi, back to Nairobi. And while I was roaming around the streets of Nairobi, I was hired by the Voice of Kenya to do a musical program.
While you were roaming, what does that mean?
I had no job, so I went
Had
to
you
do
cleared
it.
Form? No, back then, of course, it wasn't Form 4, the A-level.
No. I never did my O and A levels.
Oh.
Yes, I went to work at the Voice of Kenya as an announcer, a broadcaster.
Yeah.
And my job was, I was 18, 19 then. My job was to play music, like a DJ, musical request. the Somali,
was the name DJ Hassan.
Yeah, the Somali service, the Swahili service, and then eventually, what used to happen at the Voice of Kenya at weekends was sometimes the top news readers would come drunk or would not turn up for work, and the newsroom, which was next door, would come and say, "Yusuf, can you read the news bulletin for us?" So I started to read the Kiswahili bulletins, and then one day, at the end of the month, one of the top news readers, television news readers, didn't turn up, and I read the news on television.
On prime time.
On prime time at 7 o'clock.
That's on KBC.
KBC. Yeah, that was the Voice of Kenya.
Oh yeah, back then.
Yeah. So I left, and then I was recognized by the broadcasters. One day, the Director General of the Voice of Kenya, a man called James Kangwana, asked, "Who is this thin guy who was on television the other day?" And then the head of the news said, "Oh, no, he's just a part-time guy who comes at weekends." And then he said, "Put him on the roster."
Oh,
yes.
Just like that?
Yes, put him. I like him.
Oh.
Yes, so I was put on the news roster, and eventually I was given an opportunity as one of the presenters of Dunia Wiki,
Yes.
which was a weekly program.
How would you describe that experience back then?
Well, at that time we had a black and white television.
Yes.
I was young and enthusiastic, so it was opening a whole world for me. I was instantly recognizable in the streets. Although at the house where we stayed, we didn't have a television, we used to go to the neighbors to watch
your relatives go to the neighbor to see
I was a
you on
TV star, but I didn't have the means to have a television myself. So we used to watch it in the neighbors. And occasionally, when I was traveling from Eastleigh to the Voice of Kenya, I would be on the bus. I would not have enough change or money to pay. And the conductor would say, "You're the guy on the news, the Voice of Kenya guy." "Yes," I say. And then he says, "You can go now, but next time you must come with your money." And occasionally you will meet the wrong guy, and the Kenya buses were that they had two doors. So you would enter from the back, and you will be watching whether the conductor is coming your way, and as he gets closer to you, you get off at the next stop, and you walk 1 or 2 kilometers until you get to the station.
All right. I mean, and it's at this point, let me bring it in. I'm sure it's a struggle for many young people in the public arena. Like, people see you on TV and they imagine you're a star, you have all the money. I mean, maybe you could say something to the young people who are going through the same struggle of, because nowadays not many people will tell you, "Fine, I'll pay for you, you're on TV."
Yes. No, I think people weren't as materialistic. I think society, the population was smaller, there was less hustle, the economy was not doing that badly at that time, and there was a lot of communityness, because in the neighborhood where I lived, I knew almost everybody, and people were willing to help. People were proud of one of their own being on national television. But when I was a broadcaster, even the tie that I used for the television show, I borrowed them. I would go to the top news editors, and they'll give me their tie for the few minutes that I'm on the air. So it wasn't that easy at the beginning, as people might think.
Okay.
And we were not really as rich as we are now. I mean, Kenya has become more fluent. There are more shops that are selling quality things. In those days, there were very, very, very small number of shops that sold suits. There was 1 or 2 on Kenyatta Avenue that were famous, but these were for very wealthy
people back then.
for the bourgeois of our society, rather than for a young upcoming broadcaster.
TV. Yeah, nice, interesting. And then
I'm excited for them. I think the national broadcaster has a place, has a role that cannot be fulfilled by the others, and I'm glad that in fact there is an acknowledgement of that, and there's some investment. And surprisingly, there are 2 faces that are from my time, Catherine Kasaburi and Badi Muhsin,
Yes.
were broadcasters at that time when I was leaving the Voice of Kenya to go to.
So those were your colleagues back then?
Yes, I remember. And Muhsin, even now, is from my neighborhood. He lives in the same house that he was living when I left the country. He lives in the same community that brought him to earth and nurtured him. And he is someone we are very proud of.
Yes.
So I was really glad to see both of them back on television, because with the history of television in other countries of the world, all broadcasters are respected and honored. They have institutional memory, they have experience, and many of the top American TV broadcasters stay in their jobs from the beginning until they retire.
Yes.
Yes, it's their career. But here, there is no opportunity for continuity, there is no opportunity for stability, and jobs are not guaranteed. So I think it is good to see that KBC is doing exactly the opposite of what the private channels are doing.
All right.
And I wish them well.
Oh, we wish BH
Yes,
all the
absolutely.
best. Yes. All right, then
Which
now
is
you.
the mother.
Yeah, we can't
mother TV
ignore.
station,
We actually.
mother broadcaster.
National broadcaster.
And I think we should, the state should put more funds.
Yes.
Because there are neighborhoods in this country, even I remember at that time, where private TV channels are not available or affordable. And a lot of people watch KBC because its transmission can reach there.
Yeah,
Even though now we have gone digital.
of course.
Yeah,
All right.
and maybe it is not the same. But still there are some parts of Turkana or Mandera or Marsabit or where you probably wouldn't be able to get a good signal.
Yeah, true. All right, then you transition now from VOK back then to the BBC.
Well, yes.
How did that happen?
Well, one of the days I had just finished my late show on KBC, on Voice of Kenya. I was walking at about 8 o'clock, 7:38 from the Voice of Kenya building, and I was walking past Norfolk Hotel. And then as I was there, a gentleman signaled to me and said, hello. I tried to avoid, because Norfolk was a touristic place. It was a tourist place. There were mostly foreigners drinking alcohol at that open place in front of the Dalamea lounge. I tried to avoid. I thought, this can't be right. I don't know this person. Why is he? And then he said, look, you're the guy on TV. I've seen you on TV. Yes. And then I said, yes. And then he said, look, I am from the BBC.
Wow.
Yeah, and I like your presentation. And then he said, do you have a minute? So I came back. At that time, there were really security people at the gate of most of these hotels. They look at you, and they may consider you to be undesirable and not allow you. But this gentleman said, he's my visitor, let him come in. So I went in. He offered me a bottle of Coke. And then he said, he asked me some questions, and what do I do? And I told him. And then he said, you know, the BBC is going to recruit trainees, people, announcers and producers from Kenya and other places. And we'd like you to try and apply. And then I said, oh, fine. And when is it? He said, maybe in another 6 months or so, we'll do it. So we exchanged contacts.
Okay.
And then a month later, I was introduced to the head of the BBC monitoring service here, a gentleman called George Balash. And George Balash asked me to come for a test to do monitoring. The BBC has its Africa headquarters, monitoring headquarters here in Karen, even today. It's kind of a little bit hidden, but that's where they monitor all the radio, television stations in this region, in Arabic, in Amharic, in Kiswahili, and many other languages. At that time, it was shortwave broadcasting. So I did the test, and I was selected for a position there as a monitor. And I was earning about 800 shillings a month from the Voice of Kenya. And suddenly, I was offered a job of maybe 2,000-3,000 shillings more by this opportunity. But it was mostly night shift, so I could still do my Voice of Kenya work. I told my boss at the Voice of Kenya, and he said, no problem, as long as it's part-time, and it's the BBC, we have no problem. So I had these two jobs. And 6 months later, the BBC advertised the position. And to my surprise, about maybe 50 or 60 of the top Voice of Kenya broadcasters applied for the job. And the day when we came in for the tests, the written test,
Everyone
yes,
from VOK.
I was sitting at the back of the room, and I was shrinking in size because I was sure that I didn't have a chance whatsoever, because some of the big names that I respected in Kenyan broadcasting were there. So they did the test. We did a second one. We did a voice test. We entered a third and final version. And I left. In fact, I forgot about it. I left Kenya. I went to Kuwait. And I worked on a daily newspaper called the Arab Times in Kuwait, as well as did a small program on the Kuwaiti International Radio. So while I was there, I came back for a holiday here, and I was told the BBC has been looking for me.
Uh-oh.
And you know, in those days, they send you a telex. So they had sent many telexes, and this is several months, nearly a year. So I went to the Voice of Kenya, and one of the head of the agency, the Voice of Kenya national radio, was a guy called Hassan Mazoa, one of my mentors. And Hassan Mazoa told me, you need to call the BBC immediately. So I went to the office of Mohammed Abdullahi, who was the head of the English service at that time, and they dialed a number for me, the BBC number. And we located the recruitment officer, and she said, oh yes, we've been looking for you. Where have you been? I said, oh well, I've been away and I didn't see your telexes. And I asked her, is the job still available? And she said, yes.
Wow.
Are you
This
coming?
is almost a year on.
Yes. Are you coming? I said, I will think about it. And I left. So I told Mohammed and Mazoa that they asked me, what did she say? I said, the job is available. And what is your reply? I said, I will think about it. They said, you idiot, go back and tell her you're ready to go now. So I called her back, and she said, it's all right. You can take your time, but you need a passport, and you also need to do a medical examination. Only when you have those two,
You're good to
can
go.
you contact me so that we can arrange for you to travel. So that's how it happened, and I got my full passport very quickly. I did the medical very quickly. Everybody was very supportive, and within a month, I was on the plane to Britain.
Wow.
Yes.
And how was the Britain experience?
Well, Britain was quite interesting. The first thing I remember was that actually at the airport, the BBC sent someone I knew very well, Ben Moredi, who was the top broadcaster at the Voice of Kenya, was on a secondment. So as a confidence building, he came to pick me up at the airport. And he was sitting with me, and he said, we'll leave as soon as your baggage arrives. Your bags arrive, we'll go. And then I said, no, I have this rucksack. And he said, is that all you have come with in Britain? Yes. And I had £7 in my pocket.
Wow.
So I left, and I was taken to the BBC hostel. And this is quite an experience. I was working in a one-party state system for a radio station, a TV station, owned and controlled by the state. And therefore, there was absolutely no freedom to grow, freedom of expression, freedom of the press. And psychologically, my mind was shackled by that experience. So it was really exciting to arrive at the BBC and in Britain, in London, a country with a very strong democratic tradition, independent media, and the BBC being one of the most powerful institutions in the country and also in the broadcasting world. So I started in the Kiswahili service. I was given slots. I started reading the news, doing programs. The cultural world of Britain, the art, the music was very exciting. And I also became very politicized because when I left Kenya, although I was radical-minded, I was not exposed to the political ideas out there. So London was a transformative period for me. And I grew up very fast, mentally, physically. I went to college. I did my first degree while I was there. And I moved from the Kiswahili service to focus on Africa. I did programs with the BBC World Service. I did television. I started writing for some of the newspapers like The Guardian and the Independent newspaper. And then eventually I left the BBC to launch an African magazine. It was called Africa Events.
Where was this launch happening?
In Britain.
In Britain.
In Britain, in London.
Right.
We launched one of the first independent monthly African magazines named Africa Events, with a number of other journalists called Ahmed Rajab, who was a top BBC journalist and writer, Mohammed Mulamali Adam, another top, wrote The Late, he just passed away a year ago. We set up this news magazine to focus on African affairs, analyze Africa, give a different picture of the African continent.
So this was inspired by the BBC Focus on Africa,
Yes,
perhaps?
yes, indeed. We wanted to do an African magazine for Africa,
Oh,
rather
right.
than work for a foreign international news agency like the BBC.
Okay.
And it was really relatively successful. We were able to have a big impact. It was well read here. It was banned in many other African countries because we were quite outspoken. And eventually we did very well as a journalist, producing a good content, good quality magazine.
Yeah.
But we failed as far as the business venture
Was
of
concerned.
the publication was concerned, the advertising, the marketing of it.
All right.
And eventually the magazine passed on to another publisher. We left and I went back to the BBC again as a broadcaster.
This time you settled for BBC purely.
Yes, I actually I became the acting head of the BBC Somali service. I did quite a number of programs with the BBC African and World Service. I traveled a lot. I covered Southern Africa. I was in Lesotho, South Africa. I did the coup d'etat in Burundi. I was in Malawi when President Banda stepped aside, and I arranged the first interview that he did, international interview he did, and I covered the multi-party elections there. I covered Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, West Africa. So it was quite a new experience for me to travel out and look at Africa from below.
Now as a senior editor, so to say.
Yes.
Then now you transitioned now from that to diplomacy.
Well, I was in the final years of the BBC. There was change taking place in Namibia. So I went to Namibia in 1989, and Namibia was going from South African colonialism to independence. So I covered the Namibian elections, the first independent, free and fair elections that they had, in which SWAPO returned back home, and President Sam Nujoma was elected as the first president of independent Namibia. And when I returned back to London, the Namibian Broadcasting Corporation, which was an apartheid agency, had asked the BBC to release me on a secondment to go and work there. So I went to Namibia, independent Namibia. I arrived some few weeks after the independence of Namibia, and it was quite a great experience for me as an African to witness the independence of an African country, because all the African countries became independent much earlier than I can remember. So this was quite a fulfilling journey to see the final liberation of our African continent. Euphoric, ecstatic experience.